This is the color 5 view provided with the kit. I had a very difficult time distinguishing the green from the brown, so I decided to use these two color drawings from a book I have of the same tank where the colors are more distinguished. So what I'll do is I'll try to duplicate the camouflage pattern of the color profiles on the book, and then I'll use the kit 5 views for the top and the front and the back and try to tie them together. I took 3 different colors of MIG Dunkelgelb and mixed them together to try to duplicate the Dunkelgelb on the profile drawings. I know the colors will change as the model is weathered, but I don't have near the skill to guess where that's going to end up. So I'll start off trying to match the color and it ends up where it does. Found that the MIG dark green was a very close match to the drawing, so I used that without mixing the color. I also felt that MIG Choco Brown was a very close match, so I used that from the bottle without mixing colors as well. Comparing the book profiles and the kit 5 views, you can see that the colors differ greatly. So what I'll do is I'll use the book profiles for the camouflage pattern on the sides, and then I'll use the kit profiles and the top, back, and front camouflage patterns, and then try to tie it all together with those patterns. I primed the model with MIG One Shot. I've been using that for a while now and I really like it. The only drawback to using MIG One Shot, or Badger Stynylrez, is that you got to disassemble your airbrush and clean it after using it because stuff really gums up your airbrush. But it does lay down a beautiful surface to start from. I always paint the back side of parts first. That way, after flipping the parts over and sticking them back down to tape and painting the outside, once I peel the parts back off the tape, if the tape picks up any paint, any touch-ups are less visible if they're on the back side of the part. Even though most MIG paints are airbrush ready right from the bottle, I typically thin it with Tamiya X20, so I like spraying a thinner paint. Here's where painting the turret parts black in the Part 1 video pays off. It'd be almost impossible to get into some of those areas with the airbrush without absolutely flooding it with paint, and we certainly don't want to do that. Painting the upper hull of the Ryefield model's Panzer IV is a little bit of a challenge. There are so many small parts, details, tools, the shirts and brackets, so you got to kind of dust it on and try not to get it on too heavy. And that's where our black primer kind of comes in and saves us a little bit, where what we don't get with color, the black primer will kind of look like shadows. And as I mentioned earlier, I always paint the back side of parts first, then I let it dry for 24 hours, flip the parts over and paint the outside. After the base coat dries for 24 hours, I begin the camouflage. For me, I always use a 5U drawing if it's available. Not only do you try to replicate an actual tank, but it's just a lot easier. Having the profile or the 5U in front of me, I take a little bit of the first camouflage color and I mix it until it's very thin. I mean very, very thin. I take a brush, a fine tip brush, and I take this very thin, almost transparent paint, and I trace the color of the camouflage pattern onto the base coat. Having this almost transparent paint on your model is easily covered with the airbrush. But most importantly, when I'm using my airbrush, I'm focusing on what I'm painting and I don't have to think about the pattern. All I have to do is take my airbrush, go over the lines I've painted, and then fill in the gaps in between. And here, moving to the top of the model, I changed drawings, and I used the drawings from the 5Us provided with the kit to tie the sides together because the drawings aren't exact matches. I'm using my Badger Sotar 2020 to paint the camouflage, and I will admit I'm not a confident painter, and I'm still trying to find the perfect mix of paint to thinner ratio and air pressure where I can hit it right the first time. And this is the 11th model I've painted. So I have experience, but I don't have a lot of experience, and I'm still just trying to figure it out. And for me, painting camouflage is an intense experience. I'm totally focused for several hours. I'm trying to keep it tight. I'm trying not to make any mistakes. And, by the time I get that first color done all across the model, it's a relief to get it finished. And switching over to the brown, it's exactly the same process as the green. I use a super thin paint and I trace on the camouflage pattern, and then I come back with the airbrush and paint it in. One interesting thing, or troublesome, depending on how you see it, is I had a difficult time painting the camouflage pattern on the mesh side skirts. I just couldn't see where I was painting. I couldn't see where the paint was. And so having the white background or the paper plate did help some, but that was kind of difficult. Alright, camouflage is done. For me, that is easily the most stressful part of building a kit. I'm not an expert painter. I struggle with it. And I feel the only way you get good at something is to do it. So I figure as I build more kits, paint more kits, that my painting will improve. I painted the road wheel rubber with MIG tire and rubber paint, and I painted the drive sprockets and the return rollers silver, where those items would naturally meet up against the track surfaces. And the kit decals are thin, they're pretty good decals, so I didn't apply a clear coat under the decals, I just applied them right over the paint. I always use microsol when applying decals, so always let the model sit for 24 hours before moving to the clear coat. Been using MIG satin varnish to clear probably the last 6 models I've done. It's very easy to spray, and it's very thin, so you got to be careful that you don't flood the model with it because you'll get runs. So spray nice light coats, and if you need to, come back and spray it again a time or two. Alright, everything's cleared, and I'll let that sit and dry for 24 hours before moving on. I did a very little bit of light chipping, very little bit. And then I went and used streaking effects on the model. I find that this tones the paint way down. It seems initially when you paint the model with the base coat and the camouflage colors, the colors are very bright and unrealistic. I don't use any burnishing fluid with the frewels. I just paint them. So I painted them with the one-shot primer. And then once it's time to paint the tracks, I use a very dark rust color, and then come back with a lighter rust color, and then finally a wash. And in this case, once the tracks were rusted, I applied earth pigments to the tracks, and then secured the pigments with lacquer thinner. And once that was dry, I just took a sanding stick and sanded the cleats so that they're bare metal. And now that all that's done, it's time to put it all back together for the last time. I bought a resin commander figure off eBay a while ago. I don't remember what brand it is. He just came in a little plastic bag. But put him together, painted him up, and put him in the cupola. It's kind of nice to have a figure in your model, at least one figure. I added some mud spatter to the model, not a lot, a little bit. Didn't do a lot of weathering on this model, really. You know, just a small amount of chipping, the streaking effects, and some mud. Of course, the pin wash. You got to do a pin wash. That's about it, really. I like having display bases for my model, so I made one for this one as well. And typical extruded foam with Sculpt-A-Mold on top. Added a little bit of profiling to the terrain surface, and as I mentioned in the part 1 video with the moving suspension, I wanted to show that off a little bit. I used styrene to give it some nice smooth edges, and I used some fine sifted dirt from my yard to cover the top with. Static grass out of the package looks pretty good, but it also looks a little bit synthetic, so I wanted to give it a little more life. And I mixed up some bright fluorescent green and then added some yellow and toned the grass down a little bit, but I'm trying to get a more realistic grass color. Painted the dirt with a couple different shades of brown and then gave it a dusting of pigments. I went in and picked out some of the larger stones and painted those various colors, try to give it a little extra life. And I mixed in a little bit of white glue and trampled down the grass where the tracks would have passed through. And since it's not a Jag Tiger or some huge heavy tank like that, it didn't tear up the ground too bad. Well, that's it. The Ryefield Models Panzer IV. Excellent kit, just a terrific kit. A little bit of a challenge to build in that it requires some focus. There's a lot of small parts, there's a lot of PE, but I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it. I thought it was just an excellent kit.